The Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University is honored to be a supporter of Indian Country Today. ASU offers the only online undergraduate digital media literacy degree, teaching students how to recognize and combat inaccuracies on all platforms. They are using cutting-edge tools and tactics to separate fact from fiction in a digital world overloaded with misinformation. Learn more at cronkite.asu.edu.
This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tholohungva. Here are the headlines from Indian Country Today. The federal judge in South Dakota's district court is retiring, and he says he needs to be replaced with a federal judge who is culturally competent in Lakota culture and history. Judge Jeffrey Viken says the next federal judge must know about treaty history, especially the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie, a topic that often comes up in court. Viken served Western South Dakota since 2009 and says a Native person would be an extraordinary candidate. The 68-year-old notes there are few Indigenous federal judges, and there's never been one in South Dakota. The state has had at least one Indigenous U.S. Marshal, Bob Ikafi, who currently serves as the police chief for the Oglala tribe, and it's also had at least two Indigenous U.S. attorneys, Philip Hogan and Terry Pachota. The federal government has approved a revenue-sharing agreement between the Catawba Indian Nation and the state of North Carolina, and that step opens up a path for a new casino near the state's southern border. The Bureau of Indian Affairs signed off on the compact last week. North Carolina Governor Ray Cooper inked the deal with the Rock Hill, South Carolina-based tribe in January, paving the way for the resort and casino. The Catawba tribe has said the planned $273 million resort would bring thousands of jobs to North Carolina. The tribe will pay up to 8% of gaming revenue to the state of North Carolina under the agreement. The billions of dollars in funding for Native Americans under the latest COVID-19 relief bill is welcome, say supporters, but they warned a House committee last week that a one-time sum will not solve all of the issues facing tribes. This includes health care, infrastructure issues, health facilities, and overcrowded housing. Cronkite News reports members of the House Natural Resources Subcommittee, which held the hearing, appeared to be receptive to the range of challenges the advocates brought to the table. COVID-19 has led to the deaths of more than 6,000 American Indian and Alaska Natives in the last year. The president of Haskell Indian Nations University is being accused by an academic watchdog group of restricting the free speech rights of the faculty. It's the latest First Amendment dust-up to engulf the federally managed Indigenous college. Haskell's president, Ronald Graham, sent non-negotiable directives outlined in a March 11th memorandum after experiencing what he termed detractors to his decisions addressing issues at the university. In it, Graham forbade all employees from expressing derogatory opinions about the administration and others, contending that such expression is inappropriate and not protected by academic freedom. Haskell Vice President of Academics, Melanie Daniel, also sent a March 21st email to faculty forbidding them from mentioning their Haskell employment when speaking with media. The president's directives were sent to all employees just days after a lawsuit was filed by the student newspaper editor. Jared Nally alleged the university and its president violated the First Amendment rights of the students by retaliating against them for engaging in protected speech and journalistic activities. Graham later walked back that directive to the editor and acknowledged he took an incorrect approach. The Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, a nonprofit that aims to protect free speech rights on college campuses, wrote a letter last week demanding the administration immediately rescind the directives to employees. The nonprofit also represents Nally. An Indigenous tribe in Australia is offering an alternative to gluten, and in the process, it's also creating much-needed jobs. Wattle trees grow in abundance around Woorabinda, which is in Queensland. Wattle seed products are high in protein and take little water to grow.
Given our rural remoteness, it highlights and I think and capitalises on our assets that are around us, and that's our wattle trees.
You think about your kilo of white flour that you buy from the shops, a couple of dollars. A kilogram of wattle seed flour can sell for up to $130 to $150 a kilo.
I'd like to trial other stuff like bush medicines, bush foods.
The seeds will also be sold to mining companies to use in land rehabilitation. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, Indian Country Today has some big news.
That's right, Patty. We'll have our president on to give us more details. Plus, we'll have a woman who spent more than 2 decades covering Indigenous news in Arctic Canada. We like to joke that Indian Country Today is a 40-year-old startup. And certainly in those 40 years, we have a unique history with 4 different owners. But it's news with a Native perspective. The company has gone through a number of remarkable changes, including one last week. Joining us today to talk about the latest is our president, the president of Indigenous Public Media, Karen Michel. Welcome, Karen.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for inviting me.
So speaking about change, maybe start by just outlining the biggest changes involved.
Yeah, so we've been working toward this day for quite a while. And so some of the biggest changes are that we want to expand more into broadcasting. As you said, we've had a long history, as a newspaper and then magazine, digital site, and then now we're expanding into broadcasting. So we've been at this for nearly a year now. And so I think we're going to be focusing on trying to get more stations to pick us up. Not only that, we have, I think we haven't really marketed ourselves that well. And so we're going to be concentrating on that. Recently, we did a social media audit to try to, find out more about our audiences. We did the same with our email subscribers list. And so we are trying to find out more about each one of our segments of our audience to try to give them more of what they want, more like customized content. And to be in touch with them more. So I think you're going to see more of that. And of course, we are looking at just, all of our systems and how we can raise the quality level of everything that we do. So those are some of the things that we're going to be focusing on that's coming up.
We've both been in both mainstream and tribal media for a long time. And one of the things you hear in mainstream media a lot is, I can't find anybody. And here we have the opposite problem. We're just trying to hire as many people as we can and build up a structure to serve that. That's really your job.
Yeah. And I've heard the same thing over and over. And I think we've really assembled a great team of young journalists. There are more out there. And I think, it's going to be incumbent upon us to really focus on that. And at the same time, we try to increase our revenue so that we're able to hire more people. And I think another thing that we have going for us is that we have some pretty strong partnerships and grants that are coming in and grantors who believe in us. And I think that's going to help us when we try to, increase our staff and hire more of these really fantastic Indigenous journalists who are out there.
Across the media landscape, there are just really dramatic changes going on. But one thing that is part of what we're doing is a shift more and more to nonprofit journalism. Do you think that's an important part of the puzzle?
Yeah, I do. And it's been changing over time. And I've been on the board of another nonprofit journalism startup, and that's the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. And so it's a trend. We're seeing that more, and nonprofit news outlets really provide a lot of content that, legacy media has been, lacking because of various cuts over time. And so I think, it's a wave of the future, and we're really glad to be a part of that.
And it's interesting, the push into public broadcasting. We still live in a world where there's not a single Native American in a news capacity on broadcast television. So just the fact of being here changes things.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. For so long we've been invisible, and now here we have this opportunity to reach, greater audiences. So I think that's really great. And then not only that, we have a mix of veteran journalists and then younger journalists. So it really provides an opportunity for our younger staff members to be coached by people who have been in the business for a really long time. And I think that recipe is very, very good for our future. And so with technology changing the way that it is, I think we really have an opportunity to, groom our younger people on staff, and hopefully they'll take this over at some point, and who knows where they're going to take it.
Absolutely. Do you see, what are the biggest challenges you see with this new enterprise, this new old enterprise?
Yeah, well, of course, meeting our revenue goals is always going to be a challenge. We're looking for different streams of revenue. So we have, advertising that we do. We are going to be focusing more, I guess, on underwriting for the newscast. And through a Facebook journalism grant, we are able to do that. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges. And with any startup, usually you start out with grants from different places, but over time, once you get started, you're going to have to sustain your organization on your own. So that's our challenge, and we're going to be really focused on that.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Mark.
So speaking about the need for more Indigenous broadcasters, we have someone who has dedicated her career to bringing news to Inuit people. For 24 years, Madeleine Alakkariallak worked in broadcasting in Canada at the CBC. For the last 8 years, she was host of a news program that broadcasts in the Inuktitut language. Like our staff, hers was pretty lean. She had 2 reporters and 1 producer who spoke the Inuktitut language. The editors did not speak the language, and that made for some precarious editing. She learned a lot during that time and helped educate her audience. Recently, she decided it was time to start a new chapter in her life. She joins us today to talk about her career and the need for more Indigenous broadcast storytellers. Welcome, Madeline.
Mark.
So this is an amazing story that you just started broadcasting to the people, really. Maybe tell us how this all happened.
Well, I started with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation in 1997 as a single mom of 2 little girls. And housing is scarce up here. We have a horrible housing crisis. And this job that was available as a reporter came up, and it came with housing. And unfortunately, that's how it started. Though I've always been curious and wanted to become a journalist growing up, this was how I got into it. And it saved my life. It was a job of my dream. And we now had a home, my daughters and I. And that was a long time ago, but I started in radio. It feels like I started climbing up as a reporter, and then as afternoon host, and then morning show host in 2 languages, in English and in Inuktitut. Inuktitut being my first language, I always knew, also being raised by my unilingual Inuktitut speaking grandmother, Madeleine Alakkariallak in her Arctic. She needed a translator for when all her new friends from the South who were traveling to the North Pole needed warm clothing and someone to make them for her. She spoke no English and needed an interpreter. And so I started young. Inuktitut being my first language, I knew the importance of being able to communicate with the very people that are born and raised on Inuit homelands. So fast forward, an opportunity after I left the CBC to pursue a career at the Aboriginal People's Television Network. I jumped from radio work to television work, and I moved to Manitoba. And that was the introduction for me to television. I came back to Nunavut, where I live now in the capital city, Iqaluit, when an opportunity came knocking for an Inuktitut news reader with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I jumped at the chance, replacing a beautiful retiring woman who held the job for almost 20 years over in the Northwest Territories. They moved the show to Iqaluit, Nunavut after long years of trying. And fast forward 7 years later, here I am.
It must be, the connection with your viewers must be extraordinary, because you're telling stories that are important to them, but also in a language and a cultural context that they understand.
Mm-hmm. So my viewers range from Tuktoyaktuk in the Northwest Territories, right across through the NWT. There are Inuit in Nunavik, that's northern Quebec, and then there are Inuit in Labrador, Newfoundland, Labrador, and then when Facebook allowed us to go live, my viewers extended over to Greenland, Alaska. Not sure Russia yet, but I hope that it reaches to show the importance of the news of the day to be spoken and heard by the people that live in our Inuit homelands. And why not so? Everybody emphasizes how important it is, to not lose our languages, because it's such a connection to the people that we are, to our culture, to our hunting ways, to storytelling. It's a connection to who we are, basically, really, and most importantly. So having been that connection to, and keeping in mind, in the 24-hour clock, I had 30 minutes to tell my viewers the news of the day around the world, around Canada, around the territories, and in our communities. And because of that, we're still a lifeline. We were still a lifeline to Inuit unilingual Inuktitut speakers. They still exist. Not everyone can speak both languages, especially our elders. So the show was so important to Inuit that I was told many times, as soon as 6 o'clock Eastern comes, everybody raced home to watch Igalak and to watch me read the news of the day in Inuktitut. And I was sent many photos of young Inuit babies and children glued to the TV. That's how important this show is to Inuit in our communities, Mark.
Well, what are the prospects for young people now in broadcasting and storytelling?
I mean, there's still not enough. I mean, at the Arctic College here, they don't provide studying journalism. And I think that it's important, if we're going to introduce young Inuit to even wanting to attempt to study journalism, we have to have it available. Right now, it's difficult to travel anywhere. It makes me want to spread the word even more so now that social media plays such a big part in our lives, and that's where young people are. We just have to keep reminding them that there are opportunities available, and you can dream as big as you want to do anything. And if journalism and broadcasting and reporting are one of those, then by all means, look out there to see where they're offered. And I hope someday they'll be offered closer to home in our communities.
What's next for you, Madeline?
Well, I did a switcheroo, a whole huge career change. I found it very difficult, and I think I exhausted myself trying to deal with a corporation with policies that prevented more Inuit to work in the industry. However, an opportunity came with an airline, Inuit-owned airline, Canadian North. They asked me to come in and become their director of Inuit employment. And I took the chance, and I am terrified, but really excited at the same time, Mark.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Madeline. We'll be right back with news from Savannah Mayor, who is based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Now that we have 1 year, so to speak, of experience with the coronavirus, what are reporters seeing as big differences in Indian country? Savannah Maher is Indigenous Affairs Reporter at KUNM-FM in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Prior to that, she worked at Wyoming Public Radio and covered tribes in that area. Welcome, Savannah.
Thanks for having me.
You've had the opportunity to really see how the pandemic has hit at least a part of Indian country. Maybe tell us about that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what I've been thinking about in the last couple of weeks is just, of course, the pandemic has taken an enormous toll on tribal communities. And in fact, Native people have been more likely than anyone else in America to get really sick or to die from COVID-19. And that, of course, has been devastating. But we've also been seeing tribal governments really being leaders in pandemic response from the very beginning, when we were seeing tribes implement some of the strictest lockdowns and some of the earliest lockdowns in the country, to tribes that were rolling out coronavirus testing faster than their surrounding communities, in some cases much, much faster. And now with the arrival of the vaccine, of course, in the last several months, we've seen tribal governments yet again be very far ahead of the curve in vaccinating their citizens, with some tribal communities now approaching herd immunity levels of vaccination, which is pretty incredible.
It's so interesting because when you were in Wyoming, but many of the tribal communities that have been leaders are in communities and states where there's been basically the opposite reaction of trying to pretend that the virus didn't exist. That's probably created a lot of tension in those communities.
Absolutely, yeah. I spent most of the last year covering the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. And of course, Wyoming is a state that it took a very long time until the middle of the fall for there to be a mask mandate in Wyoming. And meanwhile, the Wind River Reservation had a mask mandate, a stay-at-home order. All of these measures that we know now are really important for slowing the spread of COVID-19. All of those measures were in place on Wind River by the end of March. And so that was really tough and made it, Wind River is very close to two big border towns, Lander and Riverton, Wyoming, and the virus doesn't respect borders, of course. So that made it really tough for the Eastern Shoshone and the Northern Arapaho tribe to keep the virus out of their communities when the surrounding communities weren't really following the same rules. So yeah, that's certainly been a source of tension in some parts of the country.
Now that you're in an urban area, how is that different?
Oh, it's very different. And so I live in Albuquerque now. And as I was covering the vaccine rollout, I was starting to notice just in my own personal circles that a lot of urban natives weren't having the same access to the vaccine as Native people living in rural areas on their reservations. And I wanted to figure out exactly why that was. So I found out that here in Albuquerque, where we have two urban Indian health centers here. We have a direct service IHS hospital, and we also have a small independently run urban Indian clinic. And they were both rolling out the vaccine at a pace that was much closer to what the state of New Mexico was doing. And I spoke to the director of the clinic here in Albuquerque and the director of another urban Indian clinic in Denver, and found that these small urban Indian clinics are seeing huge influxes of urban natives who don't usually get their care there, but are wanting coronavirus vaccines and coronavirus testing and other things like that during the pandemic. So that was a really interesting thing to dig into. And I learned some really surprising things about funding for urban Indian clinics.
We only have about a minute left, Savannah. What are you working on now?
Now, I am calling around to tribal leaders asking about the funding set aside for them in this latest relief bill and what their plans are for spending it, how it compares to the rollout of the CARES Act funding last year, what they would like to see in terms of an allocation formula. So that's what I'm focused on now.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. We'll be back with another edition tomorrow. I'm Mark Trahant.
Sometimes you got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is produced at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
This is Indian Country Today.